Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Matt Roth. Homelessness in the Northwest Valley is worse now than it ever has been before, and the city is struggling to explain the causes and to find the right solutions. Lack of affordable housing is definitely one of the main culprits, but even after voters approved Proposition HHH, the $1.2 billion bond measure, District 12 of San Fernando Valley remains the only district in Los Angeles that has not approved a single supportive housing unit. One veteran says homelessness is an issue of personal responsibility as well as a lack of leadership.
I basically wound up, I got hurt on a job. I'm an operating engineer, and I've been homeless like about 8-9 years now, I think. My wife, she thinks 13. I just looked at it as my error. I don't like fault and blame. They're negative, and that's all they ever produce is negative results. I believe in responsibility. That's what I believe in. And I feel that the government here, our government leadership and on down, is not responsible. They're not being responsible for any actions that they do.
National Alliance of Mental Illness Associate Ted Beauregard says those who live on the street are often facing legal complications and are forced to move out by government officials and law enforcement.
I know the police have been around threatening him that he better leave, and he wasn't really sure how serious to take that, but I guess, I don't know. From what I understand, the police gave a pass to July. They made it kind of green zone everywhere. And when August came along, I know there were a string of motorhomes over here on Variel, expired registration and all those motorhomes and that kind of stuff. So they had to scatter. Now they're all over the place. And so it creates littler troubles all over the place instead of, consolidation.
In Los Angeles County, it's and all over the nation, really, it's the property management companies. They are probably the middlemen that are bending a lot of the laws. There's 1,000 units within 6 blocks here going up. Townhouses, apartments, luxury condos, luxury apartments. They're furnishing out of 180 units, 5 units for low-income affordable housing or even Section 8.
Research by the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority found that only 29% of the homeless population had either a mental illness or a substance abuse disorder. But this week, the Los Angeles Times reported about 67% of the homeless population was either mentally ill or addicted to a substance. On Point's Rudy Aguado has more on the story.
Thank you, Matt. Let's please welcome today's guest. Today I am with Thomas Booth, local homeless advocate, and Ken Kraft, CEO of Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission. So thank you for joining us today. What do you think is the greatest misconcern about homelessness and homeless people? Let's start up with you, Tom.
So I think the biggest misconception is that everybody is potentially dangerous or has really super bad problems. I feel like it's an issue that affects families, senior citizens, anybody from within the whole spectrum of our society and our community.
And Ken, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that oftentimes everyone who's homeless is either a drug addict or they're mentally ill or they're lazy, they just don't want to work, and that certainly is not the case. The more you work with this particular population, you see there are vast majority of them are people that have fallen on hard times, that are working to end their homelessness, or they're very open to receiving the care and the necessary treatment to overcome the barriers that are preventing them from being housed.
A recent article in LA Times suggests that mental illness and substance abuse are more pervasive in the homeless population than officials have previously reported. This was pulled from the LA Times analysis. What are your thoughts on these findings? Thomas, what do you think?
Well, the LAHSA report that actually is the homeless count each year was reporting severe mental illness. I think that's maybe a pretty significant designation, as the LA Times says anybody with a mental health issue. So as we know, mental health happens on a spectrum. Someone could have anxiety or some minor version of mental health that would be counted maybe by the LA Times. And I think that LAHSA was focusing on more of the chronically homeless that have maybe more severe mental health issues.
Does this change anything about potential solutions?
Well, it just reinforces my concern about getting people off the street. I mean, if we have more people that are suffering, we should put more effort into housing people and providing support and shelter for them.
All right. Would you like to add anything, Ken?
Well, also we've discovered, because we have multiple programs, and many of the programs are for direct services when somebody is living on the streets, or maybe they just recently became homeless. And also what we've discovered is that oftentimes people, they may fall into homelessness, and then just being homeless can be an onset to mental illness. And I like to, think for a moment, if you are a 50, 60, 70-year-old woman and you become homeless for the very first time, and now you're sleeping out in the elements. Okay, how do you protect yourself? Where do you go? I mean, that alone is going to create a high degree of anxiety. And then you're fearful, so you're always looking over your shoulder. Then this paranoia sets in. And then, then oftentimes there's this onset of mental illness. And then unfortunately, many people, to cope with the mental illness and to try to at least calm themselves, will turn to drugs and alcohol. So then you have, this dual diagnosis effect that's going on. So it is a problem, but I think, like Tom said, if we can get people into housing, it'll help remove many of the barriers that are leading to mental illness as well.
All right, and Ken, why do you think people become homeless?
Well, like I said, because of the fact that we do frontline services, we have the opportunity to do intakes on individuals that are homeless. As a matter of fact, over the past 14 months at our one site location in Van Nuys, we've done over 2,100 unique intakes. Okay, so these are not duplicates. These are 2,100 unique individuals that are homeless here in the San Fernando Valley that have come through our doors seeking help. And the reasons for homelessness are varied. Oftentimes it could be domestic violence, it could be loss of a job, it could be an emancipated youth, okay, that now has nowhere to go. It could be individuals that, because of substance abuse, that they've, have kind of burned their last bridge and now they find themselves homeless. So there's many different reasons why people are homeless, and that's what makes solving homelessness a bit of a challenge, because there's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. We have to create oftentimes customized solutions to reach individual people.
And can you explain the different types of homelessness?
Well, you have chronic homeless and you have situationally homeless. Okay, and oftentimes the most people are aware of the chronically homeless, because oftentimes they're the ones that you'll see every day at the end of the freeway, and they have the sign, we'll work for food, and so they're very visible. But the ones that you don't see are the situationally homeless. Most people are not aware of the fact that there are over 400 families that are homeless living in motels up and down Sepulveda Boulevard. Okay, those are situationally homeless. Those are people that the average price of a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is $2,100. Okay, that is unaffordable for many, many people. And so you have families that have become homeless and that they're situationally homeless. So we can work with them to help get them initially into the motels, and out of the motels into either transitional or permanent housing. But the chronic and the situational homeless, very, very different populations, and we have to have different approaches for both.
And is homeless the correct term?
Well, we tend to say now people experiencing homelessness. We don't want to label someone as that's a noun. That you're not a homeless. No, you are an individual who's experiencing homelessness, and hopefully it'll be as short as possible.
All right, Tom, do you feel that the local government has been effective in finding and implementing solutions to homelessness in the Northwest Valley?
Well, I know that there's council districts, there's 15 of them, and this about 2 years ago, the Prop HHH money became available, and I think it was incentivized by the mayor and by the city council to try to grab it up as fast as they could. Well, it turned out that the people that were very, very interested in providing those services in their community grabbed up a lot of the money, and then now it's all gone, the Prop HHH money, and then in our council district, right now we have zero. And so we're the lowest council district out of the 15, which is not it's a dubious honor at best. And I just also wanted to go back and touch on a little bit what Ken was saying regarding, the causes of homelessness. So we see, wages flat for like the last 20 years, and we see the incredible increase in driving the housing cost up. And I just think that it makes sense. Anybody that's on a fixed income, especially our more vulnerable populations, they're the first ones that are going to fall out. And it's going to be people with mental health issues or substance use issues. It's going to be older adults. There's been a 30% increase in the last 2 years in older adults. They're on fixed incomes and they can't afford the constant increases of rent. So I just wanted to kind of go back and actually add a little bit of that. So the most vulnerable people in our community fall out of homelessness first in this kind of a situation.
Are homeless shelters proven to be effective?
I think there's a kind of a change on that. I mean, shelters were more the old style where you'd line up at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. and then you'd kind of filter in and then you would be released in the morning to go find something to do. And that model has changed. I think that's why we're moving towards more of a low barrier and then continual 24-hour around the clock. And I know Ken knows a lot more about this than I do, but the idea is trying to find people a way to kind of set up their lives and bring their belongings with them and kind of stop that street experience. And it's also a more humane way. And some people have had pets in the past that they couldn't bring in their animals that are really, really, I think, kind of almost like lifesavers for them potentially outside. And so it's more bridge housing, which is short-term type of housing. And the idea is a bridge to home. And so then that would lead right to more supportive housing, which would be more fixed housing.
All right, would you say that homelessness is partly a housing problem? Ken, what do you think?
I think it's majority a housing problem. And if I may, I just want to, maybe comment on, you asked the question about CD12. And unfortunately, CD12 has also gone through some political change, where you had a city council member who resigned, and then there was an interim city council member where that individual was not going to be making any kind of permanent decisions to affect the next elected person. So now we have John Lee, who's been elected. And I know he's taken some heat over the issue in Chatsworth and Topanga, but all I can say is what he's told me. And in my conversations with John, he says, Ken, we need to open up facilities in my council district. And so I'm actually working with him right now on one that if we can pull this off, it would be a minimum of 114 rooms, which would house over 300 people in CD12. And so we are hoping that will hopefully materialize. And then the other thing you mentioned having to do with shelters. For a while, shelters became a bad word because from the federal government down, everything was housing first. We need to get people into permanent housing. And a housing first, permanent housing model works great when you have housing. But if you don't have housing available, then what do? And that's why the mayor of Los Angeles then, he talked about the interim housing, that instead of waiting the 2 to 3 years that it often takes to build permanent housing, and meanwhile, if our homeless numbers are increasing, then we're seeing the encampments increase, we're seeing a visible increase of homelessness on the street, that let's create a system whereby we can create bridge housing, as Tom said, this interim housing, but not like the shelters of old, as Tom said, where we're not warehousing people. We are actually getting them off the street with dignity, and we're putting the wraparound services around them so that we can then help them go from bridge housing into permanent and permanent supportive housing.
All right, Tom, can you talk a little bit more about affordable housing? How does it work and who is eligible?
So affordable housing is just, I think, in a broad term of housing that someone could pay with their typical wage. And I know for many, many years, 25% of your income was kind of like the marker of what you would spend on housing. And then it kind of grew to be 30% as kind of more of a standard. And then lately it's been more like 50% as a standard. So our affordable housing thought process has changed over the years, and that's really basically what it is. Kind of like a typical person on an average wage afford their housing in a certain area. area. And I think what's happened is that, as we talked about earlier, is that the housing costs have been driven up so high. I think that if someone were to work at minimum wage, it'd take them 80 hours a month. 80 hours a week for a month to be able to afford like a one single bedroom apartment. And so that's the concern, is that there really is a lack of affordable housing, and I think that's really, again, the driver of homelessness.
Okay, what is the difference between supportive housing and affordable housing, and has one proven to be more effective than the other?
Well, I think it depends who you're housing. Many people, if they're situationally homeless and we can get them into affordable housing, they don't need support. Okay, they just needed that hand up to get into a place of stability where now they're working, you know, they're paying their bills and taxes, and they're back on their way to being integrated into society. It's oftentimes individuals that might lack some of the social skills. They might have, you know, mental illness and other challenges that need the supportive skills. You know, nowadays, not only are there housing navigators, there's housing stabilizers. So within the field that we work, we realize it's not just enough to get somebody into permanent housing. Once they're there, how do we keep them housed? Because it doesn't do us any good if we, you know, get hundreds of people housed and then they lose their housing. And so we have to now work to stabilize them, and that comes through mental health services, that comes through learning how to budget, learning how to keep a job, how to do interviews, how to raise your kids, how to speak well with people. So there's a lot of things that go into helping people be stable within their new found home.
And Tom, would you like to add?
Yeah, let me just add to that, because I do provide, as a mental health clinician and working for a local community mental health center, I do go out in the field and I do work with people in supportive housing, and as Ken says, people do need an extra support. I'm an extra layer of support for mental health, and we do work on existing mental health issues, and sometimes, quite often, it is PTSD. It's some of the trauma that is faced out in the streets as they're homeless, and so we provide an extra layer, again, trying to stabilize people. And I think the big marker for supportive housing is retention over a year and then retention over 2 years. And I think statistically, supportive housing has about a 90% retention rate. And then I think as it drops off for the second year to about 85, but it's still very good. So we're taking people who are chronically homeless, are experiencing chronic homelessness, and providing housing for them, fixed housing, and then they're wrapped around with services, as we mentioned earlier. And then there's a really good outcomes potentially for that kind of a scenario. And that's the reason why I think there was a focus on that. Again, it's taking too long to get too many of these units up and running, but we do have a few in the Los Angeles area and also a few in the San Fernando Valley.
Is there evidence that affordable housing really does help reducing homelessness?
I think you just said it.
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
It works.
All right, so 2 weeks ago there was a protest to stop City Council from building a supportive housing unit near Chatsworth Park Elementary School. Do you think these parents' concerns are valid?
Well, I think there was protesters and then counter-protesters, so there's like a dialogue out there. And I think the idea is that people are scared, and we have to kind of acknowledge that, you know, as Ken mentioned earlier, this like archetypal kind of an idea of a guy that might be aggressive or shirt off talking to himself, and we kind of have that image frozen. And the reality is that this affects all different populations. And the idea is that supportive housing has never been shown, so it's not a shelter, it's supportive housing on the Topanga, Devonshire spot, and that is a place where people will go that'll be permanent residents, and it'll have security around the clock, it'll have managers around the clock, it'll have wraparound service throughout the day. And so the intent is not to have a kind of a lawless shelter situation, which I don't know that they even exist, but there's no known statistic that says that around permanent supportive housing there's any kind of increase in crime rate. And so I think a lot of it is a fear-based approach and concern, and I understand as a parent, and especially when my kids were young, I was like actually even more highly motivated to be concerned about things like that, and I understand where they're coming from. But if we take the time to really research and look at the facts, that there really isn't any increase in crime around supportive housing.
Ken, what do you think?
Well, I think every time that a proposal goes out there for affordable housing or for a shelter or for new facilities, it's usually met with resistance. I think the best example of this was Union Rescue Mission when they were proposing up in Lopez Canyon to open up a facility for moms and kids, and they were met with tremendous resistance. They actually had to spend $6 million on legal fees trying to get this thing through. I'm sorry, $600,000 on legal fees. And ultimately, they won, and now the community loves them. It's usually what we're not up on, we're down on, and ignorance does breed fear. And so the more we can have conversation and dialogue and not be driven by fear, but by facts. You know, what do the facts say? And like Tom said, the facts don't bear out that it's going to bring, you know, I was actually proposing a shelter in one area in North Hollywood, and I went and I met with the land use committee, and I was meeting with another committee, and then I was invited to the next one, but I was called by the city council district and said, you know, don't show up because we can't guarantee your safety. And what had happened was one gentleman took my picture, put it on a flyer, passed it all throughout the community, and said, this guy is going to be driving down our home values. He's going to be bringing in rapists and you know, child molesters. And when I got to the facility, there was like 300 to 400 people crammed into this small room. And when I got there, some guy walked out and he saw my face, and he literally threatened to kill me. And so you can see there is opposition, and so we have to overcome fear with fact, and we have to work for a solution that works in all communities, not just certain segments of the community.
Are there other ways in which building more affordable housing benefits the community?
Well, first of all, we have to find a way to drive the price down. For those that saw the city controller's report this past week, the fact that a single unit of affordable housing was $600,000 to $700,000, that's not affordable. And what happens is then you're having a large amount of money that's going to building a smaller number of houses. Whereas, let's just say the bridge housing project that we're working on right now in North Hollywood, the cost per housing unit is $23,000. So $23,000 versus $500,000 or $600,000. And so we have to be smart with our money because we don't have an endless supply of it. Like Tom said, unfortunately, Triple H, which was $1.2 billion to create 10,000 units of affordable housing, that was spoken for within the first 2 years. And so, we have to look at that, and we have to be smart with our building and making sure that it's being dispersed across all of Los Angeles and all the council districts.
I just wanted to add to that too. There really needs to be like a discussion to have many options on the table. I know they're doing modular things coming from China, down at Alvarado in Los Angeles. There's this, I think they're talking about doing plastic printing of like smaller homes. That's a council file that's going through LA City Council right now. So I think all options should be on the table, and we should try to borrow from best practices all over. I visited a community first in Austin, Texas, and they have two like villages side by side, and they've managed to find a way to house 400 people, or 201, and then hopefully 200 in the next. And so we need to look at all different options and try to also compete with whatever is the cheapest way of dealing with this, so we can get more people off the street.
Homeowners are concerned about home values going down. Is that valid? Ken, what do you think?
Well, I think if you have a shelter, let's say, that's not properly run, it can be problematic in the community. And that's why it's important that you have good service providers that are making sure that they are rolling out industry best practices to ensure that people are not just wandering around and going throughout the streets. And so, in our facilities, our bridge housing facilities, we have 24-hour security. When people are leaving, we have to know where they're going when they're coming back. And so there's some controls and mechanisms in place that overcomes the fears of what people think might happen.
All right. If mental illness is often a reason for homelessness, do parents have valid concerns?
Again, mental illness, that's highly stigmatized illness, and it could be, most people I work with, is the most have depression or anxiety. Those are the two most common mental illness issues. And so I think there is an extra level of stigmatization of mental illness, and I don't think there's really anything to be worried about. I think we have to be careful with everybody, like in every situation when we're in the public, and if someone does require assistance, then we should have the appropriate humane way of addressing those issues.
All right, what kind of changes would you like to see in the fight against homelessness in the Northwest Valley?
Well, considering there's no housing, I think let's start there. And I'm not picky. I don't care if it's emergency housing, transitional housing, permanent housing. I don't care. When there's no beds available, let's get beds. I have a good friend, he's from Australia, and he says, how is it you have so many homeless people here? You're America. America can do anything. When America wants to put somebody on the moon, we put them on the moon. When America wants to create an atomic bomb, we create an atomic bomb. You mean to tell me that America can't come up with a solution to get people off the streets and get them housed? The answer is we can. We have the will, we have the technology, we have the resources. We just have to stop fighting ourselves and let's agree how to do it and let's get it done.
Yeah, I agree with Ken's sentiments for sure on that. And I think it's about political will and making it happen, and also education to the larger community. I was in neighborhood council in the area about 4 years ago. We started to learn about this issue, and we decided to let's get together resources in the West Valley. And our list was so small, we didn't have, when it was that was kind of the point of it in a way. We only had 3 different service providers and no housing. So that's the key. We just don't have enough of that. Every community, it's a problem now in every community, and every community needs to address this equally.
All right, and that's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Hey, let's check out this park. Wow, that's really cool.
To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
What are you doing in there?
What's that?
I wouldn't do that. What are you doing? What are you looking for?
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Play Eric Amarola's Race Day Mix.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us at KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 5 and on LA 36 at 4 on Thursday afternoons and 7:30 on Friday nights. For On Point, I'm Matt Roth.